So there were some people in the audience who had some particular questions about decentralized identity that didn't get a chance to ask them. This would be a really great opportunity to, let's kick off with that.
Oh my God. Okay, that was the project for Civic question. So you probably get that a lot, but how do you comply with GDPR? We had like a few weeks ago, we had this panel discussion here in Amsterdam from UVA when lawyers and blockchain specialists in GDPR said that it's impossible to comply with GDPR, you know, the new privacy law for Europe on the blockchain, and that every time when you pass the data that's pseudo-anonymized and you also want to make money of it, but even if you just transfer as a node, even if it's decentralized, it is not compliant. And although it's very difficult to find a culprit right now, it's up till the point where somebody actually sues the node or sues the validator or the requester. So do you provide any ideas and solutions for GDPR compliance and tools for your validators and requesters, or do they have to do it on their own?
Thanks for the question. So it's definitely a big topic in the community, and so the answer is twofold. So one-fold answer is to prove that the data we put on the blockchain is actually not related to GDPR. And there are certain boards also in Europe that try to make that definition. Like, how often do you need to hash data with what algorithm that you may make it GDPR compliant?
But can I jump in? Because
yes.
they said that anytime you can actually rehash, so you can recover the data, it's already GDPR. It needs a GDPR compliance.
I know. So this is
pseudo-anonymized, it's already not enough. It has to be so much anonymized and hash, you can never recover it, and it has to be like marketing purposes, like an aggregation kind of data to not be compliant.
But I think this is part of the community to make blockchain application ready. At some point, there are certain degrees where it doesn't make sense that specific points of data are not on your blockchain. That being said, the other approach is you don't have to put personal identifiable data on the blockchain. And then it's a question, what is personal identifiable data? So if you say your DID, so this identifier that you create when you approach that service, if you put this in the GDPR space, then of course we're talking about a complicated element. But anything else is not derived from your personal data. So it doesn't have your name hashed around it. So if you talk about a verifiable credential, so if someone issues a credential on your name, the part when I was talking about revocability, so that your verifiable credential lives on the chain as an attestation, it's just a unique link. So you will find an identifier that is just made out for this credential that you will find the signed credential. So let's say ABC, and you will put this brand new identifier ABC on the blockchain, which states the relation. So only you have the verifiable credential that you hand out and that has this identifier, and it is not associated in any way, also hashed with your PII. So for verifiable credentials, it's solvable. The other is a kind of aspect, how do you see DIDs? If DIDs fall under the aspect of GDPR, and it's my strong assumption that it does not, then we're fine.
Was there another question from out there? You guys have the microphone, so go ahead, pass it amongst yourselves. Go ahead.
Yep. I don't know if you guys had, if you guys had any questions you wanted to kick off with, or I had a couple questions that came earlier. One of them, yeah, Orfeas, you already gave it, but I'll let you give it because you can state it better.
So let's first remind the topic of the panel, which is decentralized identity and how to handle the what is decentralized identity, how to make it, how to break it, how to use it, We had some very nice ideas today, and so the things that I would like any system, any proposed system to, the properties I would like the system to have, is to be completely decentralized. This is something of a philosophy I have, but some people here may not agree totally that this is 100% needed. But in my opinion, decentralization is something that you cannot go without, for reasons that were explained very well. You also have to find a good solution for destroying accounts, destroying the data when somebody leaves this world, and when somebody new comes to this world, you have to also create new identity for them and try to find a way to do this in a decentralized way without having some authority verifying that a new baby was born. And lastly, of course, even though the system evolves and even though new identities come and old identities go, we would like some kind of Sybil resilience, Sybil resistance, a way to avoid people having too many accounts if it helps them game the system. If it doesn't help them game the system, then they could also make many accounts, so be it. So these are my questions, and I would like each of the members who has an answer to try and give some intuition.
Go ahead.
So what I like about your talk is that you're building a reputation system on blockchain transactions, which is a totally valid way to build reputation if it is transparent in the system. So if you log into a system and say, we evaluate your trustworthiness according to your last 40 transactions or according to your peers that vouch for you, if they make it valid, and if maybe they, and GDPR compliance also comes in this case, like you give away your identity and associate it with the historic transactions. I think that's why companies like Civic, Uport, and Sovereign try to move away from anchoring too much on chain. So just a minimum on chain and have the ecosystem above handle all the privacy related concern and handle the reputation system with crawlers or that go around the hub. So you don't look at blockchains directly to infer reputation. The other element about siblings and having multiple identities, I think we at Civic have the opinion that it's also a self-sovereign decision. So do I want to go around and have 10 identifiers, and if one identifier I use my government ID and the next I build a different reputation? I think this flexibility will still exist in the future to represent myself in a certain way or with a certain profile. I think what we don't want to do is like build this super decentralized identity where it's like, okay, everything is in here, because yeah, correlation risks, and maybe it also gets confusing for the user what their identity is associated with. I hope that in some way regarded your question. I actually have a question for the video service, because it's not completely identity related, but our tradable product on the marketplace is a verification service or handout of a credential. So I just was wondering, in this transcoding system, what is the tradable unit that you pay for in your microtransaction? Is it like a second of video stream, or is it like CPU power, or?
Yeah, so the product would be for the amount of video processed. So you're essentially buying computation in the form of ETH or using any ERC20 token eventually. And
how do you split that? Is it like, I don't know, how many CPU cycles?
Oh
like
yeah,
you have to find a minimum unit to make it.
Yeah, right now on the network it's charged by number of video segments, and each video segment is about 4 seconds. And I think in the future we'll move to the amount of pixels being processed. And so we're kind of in the middle of that shift.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? Or?
All right, something just to add to the discussion in general. Like, we had many thoughts about key management. We work on Web of Trust with a different implementation with multisig and everything. And the reason why we decided to take the route that we took, like building somehow the solution that we see that doesn't give identity to users but give access, is because we look about, like, all right, we have basically 3 layers the way that I see identity and this whole system and this ecosystem playing. We have KYC, where everybody somehow accepts your identity, your verified somehow data. You have the layer of the identity in itself, where you have maybe a document, maybe a decentralized ledger, where you have the data in itself. And the other layer is the layer where you actually access things, all right? So the access in itself is the fundamental execution of what an identity means. And then if you're looking at the Web 2.0, like these big players that right now we have, like Facebook, like Google, they are the main center of giving digital identity to the network, right? Like, I exercise my power of access something with Facebook much more than I use my passport. But it didn't start like that. What Facebook realized, what Google realized, what all the systems somehow realized is that access is the fundamental thing to users. That's what users want. It's like basically go through doors, not care about like, all right, what am I showing here? So the reason why we took the route about creating these things called ephemeral keys, you know, something that is even less than a wallet, which is already little, all right, is that what we want to think about users, what we have to think, the experience that they have is, okay, I want to use things maybe with like this piece of data where that has already been authenticated. I have used these things with like some kind of applications. But the fundamental thing that you're going to do with this piece of data, it's access, all right? It's like, all right, I want to use this application, I'm just going to use it. So this is what somehow we realized that this was the critical point, creating something that is a killer app, you know, something that can really change the ecosystem in terms of blockchain, in terms of delivering decentralized value to people. It's creating something that you can give like full, like seamless access. And then just like, if you guys have any thoughts about it in terms of like these layers would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, if I can pick up as well on the identity discussion, I'm not sure I want my daughters to see me. Don't think I want my daughters to see me speaking to a fluffy toy, but what the heck. Firstly, on GDPR, we built a GDPR compliant system 5 years ago. It's still compliant. We have council's opinion on it, and the answer there is absolutely fine. You know, you're not going to store on the blockchain the data. You're using the blockchain for another purpose. Hence my point about multiple chains, and I'm afraid that's kind of been self-evident for a while. I think the second thing about the GDPR element to it is it's actually rather related to the same problem we're going to face on quantum crypto. So with quantum computers looking at potentially breaking the crypto, we already have that problem today. So do I want permanent data out there? And we wrote a report on that earlier this year, arguing that any responsible blockchain provider should be using at least 2 crypto methods, one of which should be quantum resistant. The second thing I'd like to point out is I think we're facing kind of an interesting battle geopolitically. People in Western Europe spend a lot of time arguing about GDPR. The US is a bit wild and woolly, and who knows what's going on. And remember that over 2 billion people in the world exist under 2 state-controlled systems, Aadhaar and the Chinese system. So we sit here and we kind of play identity in our little space, but there are radically different models out there, and I wouldn't want to predict which one wins. But I'd break them up into 4 parts, and it's really whether it's state or private. Do you believe in a multiplicity or a single provider? So we in the United Kingdom have been terrible at identity. We had our debacle about 13 years ago when the state decided it would have a single provision, and the public rebelled against it. Most of Europe is sort of multi-provider-ish, with state having a preponderance. Then we have private systems. Of course, a private single is a monopoly, and we want to avoid that too, and that's the decentral bit. But what I think is interesting is where are we going to go with this? And I'll just leave you with a thought tonight, somewhere before we get to the port, and that's that imagine that we really had a pop coin, a population coin that you got at birth. There are a lot of things we'd like to string along that. if you take Aubrey Meyer for about 20 years now has proposed that we ought to get a carbon budget when we're born, and that's really the way to allocate things. And it roughly comes out at about a ton per person per year, and we're well over that. And I think it's somewhere in Somalia you're at about the right level. Now, if you take that in line, were that to happen, it would change the nature, I think, of a lot of geopolitical negotiations. You would tie population to nuclear weapon exposure. You tie population to water usage. You could see a number of things that would be tied to it if we could get that going. And I think we got a long way to go, because most of what we do, and I mean myself included, I'm not having a go. I thought there were some great presentations today, but most of us are coming up. What can we do that's slightly better than passwords? Because that's where we're starting. And I think it's going to be an interesting thing for the world to have to address what true identity means, and if we can play it. I also think the last thing I'll say is death. Death is, to me, like the hardest one. You're all a lot younger than I am, I think. I had 3 friends die this week. It's not uncommon. As you get older, trust me, it just gets more frequent, but who notified me that they were off grid, that they'd stop? Yeah, and I think that's going to be interesting too. Anyway, just some musings.
So I really appreciated these comments, because I would like to show some of the difficulties of creating something like a population coin. First of all, this would immediately create a market. Even if we could somehow make it in a decentralized way, this could create a market for selling your population coin and selling your identity if you're poor, and somebody else who's willing to take on 2 faces for a price. And the reason why that is possible is because there's no single, clear, undisputable way of identifying people, and that's the core problem of identity. And that's why it seems like there's no real way around having someone, maybe code, decide who is entitled to a unique certificate of personhood and who isn't. Our cells keep getting replaced. Our DNA is unique up to a point, and you cannot sequence your DNA every day. And the worst part is that we don't have in our cells, we don't have in our body, anything that could play the role of the private key. There's nothing that we cannot. When I speak, my DNA gets all over the stage, and could be copied by others and used as a biometric to trick any sensor that they are me. And if we know how the sensor works, we can reverse engineer it and fix it again and trick it. And so you have to have somebody fixing it and improving it every day, and that someone has to have, for all practical purposes, has the tool to control who is entitled to personhood and who isn't, which is some kind of centralization. And if we could solve this biometrics issue, then the whole thing could be almost solved. But I think that there's no clear answer from biology as to how to identify uniquely and undisputably a person. And because this question is not answered by biology, we have to use ad hoc measures and to trust central authorities or some private entities that hand out accounts. And on the other hand, what defines us as a person, each and every one of us, is our interactions with others, is the image that others have for us. So I think that if there's any kind of identity to arise, any kind of decentralized identity, it should have to do with our interactions with the world. And if we would like to assume several different identities, like maybe I would like to have 2 Facebook accounts, nobody should stop me from doing that. The fact that right now I cannot change my appearance for when I go to my work, to my job, and then change it drastically when I go out to party. This is an annoyance for me. I should be able to decide how I look every single day, and if I want to have a different account, different personality, each not from the inside, but what others can see, I should be able to change it. So the direction that other works here are taking, and assuming, and the fact that they assume that we can make multiple accounts, and that's no problem, because it won't give us any more benefit. It won't allow us to. So how we could game the system in case we have two accounts? If we put these accounts to converse and create fake traffic that can be leveraged to, for example, show to others that how good we are in conversation, or how trustworthy we are, this would be dangerous, yes. But if there is a way that each individual collaboration between two people, each individual conversation between two people does not influence the rest of the world in any way that can give benefit to a cheater who owns both accounts, then we could actually have multiple identities, and this would be ideal. Because this is, code can give us freedom to do this thing. Why not take the chance and do it?
If I have just a moment, the biometrics problem is indeed really big, and as you mentioned, it's really difficult to like create any kind of identity that links us to our physical thing. But I do think that we have something inside our body that can be used as a unique identifier, which is things that are in your mind. So you can have some kind of idea in your mind that is unique to you, and no one else will be able to force that or take that in any kind of way if you use that thing to sign or whatever things. But my main question was about, and you also, like, you answered this mostly, but I feel like maybe we should be thinking about identity in a different way rather than something that links us to as like a physical person, which is the entire system that we have now. Like, we have a passport, or we need this kind of identity to do things. But there is another type of identity that we have, which is like something that is not linked to our physical self, but more how we represent ourselves. For example, how, like, our online identity. For everyone here, I assume that, like, if someone took your email address from you, that would like have an incredible impact on like your online identity. Probably you use that to authenticate yourself to all sorts of accounts.
But it has an impact because services depend on email addresses.
Yes.
So it's not as much my fault, but other services make the email address an important entry gate into the whole system.
But I mean,
that
your online identity sort of is linked to this system, and in a way that you can have, if you want to, you can have multiple online identities. You can have multiple Twitter accounts or email addresses, or even Facebook accounts. I think you can have multiple Facebook. I don't know. I don't have Facebook, but yeah, technically not allowed. But I think in a way. There shouldn't be a reason why we need to link identity to only a single person. Like, if you want to have multiple online identities, that should just be fine in a way. So, like, the previous speaker mentioned this as well, but I wonder what the other speakers think about just having having multiple identities.
I will give on, and then I will give a statement to that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, like, just in general, like, thoughts about being in the space is that I have been banned from all social medias already. I've been banned from Telegram, from Facebook, from Twitter, from LinkedIn, for everything, because I like to stress test it and see what's the barriers. And the last one was Telegram, and I was like not capable of basically send messages to different groups and people who are not in my context somehow. And the whole point about the experiment was to measure the level of censorship that the technology was giving and what kind of experience, what kind of things I was doing to be inflicted towards that. And the last one, and like, all right, so now it's going to be my decision to say, is this fair or is this not fair, right? It's going to be my central entity saying this. Is that simply for creating two identities from the same IP, I got banned on both identities from Telegram. And I was like, all right, I didn't do anything wrong. It's just like I was just literally trying to talk to people, and it was people in my network actually, or in some open groups, having discussions with people. And then what I realized in one of the experiments is that if I was in an open chat and 3 people tag me as spam, I would get like shadow ban, which is like you're not banned off the platform, but you cannot talk with strangers, you cannot speak in public groups. Meaning that with 3 of my fake identities, I could tag someone as shadow spam, which is really broken if you think about the system in itself, because it's really easy to spam. You know, I can find someone that I somehow dislike, and I'm just like, all right, why not? And just do that. So like, there's a lot of implications that have somehow to be considered. And like right now, I feel that we're far from the ideal. But if we're talking about decentralization, if you talk about freedom on the internet, we have to be able to somehow do what we want until the limit of the next person. But if I want to have several accounts with several usernames, with several somehow like users that do different things, just because I won, like I believe like clearly I should be allowed to do it, because this is like me entitled the right to create accounts. It's what it is. And yeah, that's just my vision on that.
Ooh, I'm not sure I want to touch this. It's full of DNA. Oh, no. No, I think you raise a great point. Look, I believe in multiple identities and all that, but the great presentation earlier today was trust is risk, you know, and identity is risk. And so a lot of the work we're doing in London is really around, I think you call it something different. We call it indemnification models. You can call it stakes, whatever you like. But basically, if somebody tells me you're you and it turns out to be wrong, then I want something out of them. It's insurance, really. And before we think this is all brand new stuff, I don't think we can go around talking about marketplaces if we don't look at how real markets work. And this is not new. There's a system out there that was created in the 90s amongst the banks. There are about 46 European banks in it, so it's been running for 20 years. It's called IdenTrust, and it works like quite simply. I, as a bank, approve, Eric to my right. I hand him on to him because I couldn't do the service. Turns out he's a fraudster. You come back to me and say, how much do you owe me? And I have to pay up. So these are not new systems. And that's a real market where we've actually got probability and risk. And I think that identity has to go up that route if we want a free internet. And I think this is where we ourselves struggle to get out of a kind of a legal mentality of 100% identity or nothing, and not realizing that most of this has got to be probabilistic.
But just one point to this.
All right.
The argument is that there existed centralized services that solved a lot of these problems and marketplace things in the past. I think the problem that the internet has now is that it pushes towards monopolies in any way. So if the system was successful in any way, someone would have gathered it and be like, okay, I'm the central authority of organizing the punishments and the rewards. And I think what we're trying to do, and we're also trying to get it right, we just want to build the infrastructure where we say, okay, the user is put in the center, still the ecosystem has to be correct. Like if we use decentralized identity but associated with centralized services where we say you need this verification from this central evil party and because only then you can enter this country, then decentralized identity doesn't mean anything. So in a way when this ecosystem gets built up, I truly hope that decentralized reputation systems will become a big thing, so that you can prove I'm this person because I can prove 3 factors that are completely unrelated to another person showing me other 3 factors. And only then the user will have real self-sovereign control. And that's why we're building this identity protocol, because we think if we do it right from ground up, then we can break up some of the monopolies and services as well.
I have a question here about the biology. I think no two human brains are same. The anatomy is different. plus the identity can also be the life experiences. So collectively, the anatomy of the human brain and the life experience can be, so my life experience can be different than yours. So that makes my identity. So it's just an idea that why not using human brain? I think we are going more for, we are
experience, what was your pet's name, your first pet's name? Because that is not sufficient, right?
No, that's what I'm saying. It's not life experience, but experiences. There are so many experiences that defines my identity, and also my identity would evolve over the years. So it's now we have fixed identity with respect to our, the passport is one identity that defines us, but I think the identity will evolve in the future. That what makes me who I am, I think it's changing.
And I think we can separate identity and key management completely. I think we see key management as an entry point requirement to owning identity. So it can be solved completely independent, how you protect your key material. And there are nice approaches. I've seen computer games where you have to play a game to remember a 1024-bit entropy key just by repeating actions in the game. And it's totally easy for you to remember. But people have a hard time remembering a passphrase of 24 words. So it's just how we present it to the user, I think. There are several solutions to the problem of draining your mind for your unique information.
Yeah, also just to entertain the conversation, like we just came, anyone here were in DevCon? Like just for the sake, cool. Did you hear about Blockchains LLC, right? Yeah, so there was this secret company there, and like nobody kind of knew what are they doing, and they had like all these banners all over Prague saying like we're tired of waiting, some really kind of like interesting things, and then we went to the party and like what they're actually doing, they bought like this insanely giant like land on the desert, and they gonna try to build a blockchain city on top of it. Basically, all the registers will be, and they already bought the land. More than $300 million have been poured like into this endeavor. Yeah, it's insane, and like it's insane from both sides because like it's really cool, to be honest, to see someone who's actually that driven to put that amount of money into something that is, you know, you have to really believe it. And like going to DevCon, which is one of the most like, how can I say, like there's all devs, all right? So like if you show things that you're gonna say everybody's extremely agnostic, and to have the face to go there and face that audience and say that, I think it was really brave, really courageous. And after that, we had the opportunity to actually have dinner with the CEO of Blockchains LLC, Jeffrey, and we asked him, all right, what are the pillars of this blockchain city that you're trying to do? And his answer was identity. So that was one of the first things. And like the way that they're creating the identity is quite interesting. It basically it's a combination of like password, but the biometric system that they're using is your veins. All right. So they're using the veins in your arm to basically register and hash everything on the blockchain to create this identity. And now if it's the most secure or like reliable or like interesting way to create your identity on the blockchain, I don't know. But I was doing some research on it, and like it looked somehow reliable, the studies that people were doing this. So the whole why I'm saying this is that there's actually people looking into how create this biometric system that can put together blockchain, that can put together like your body, things you have, things you know, things are part of your body, to really allow you to have access and interconnect all the things you do with who you are on the blockchain.
Moritz, can I ask a question about,
Please.
You just went there, you have 4,000 people, everybody's talking about decentralized identity. When are we going to get a blockchain which can actually do thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of transactions and not charge $1 a transaction?
Yeah.
When is that going to happen? Because that's what we need. We need a workhorse which really works. And at the moment it's very expensive.
It's true. So there's two ways to go about it, right? There's two verticals, and this is the like just to say like out of this 4,000 people, this is the answer that nobody wants to answer. All right, this is the question that nobody wants to answer. So when people ask about roadmaps and timeline, everybody's really cautious. So what I'm going to say is like from my understanding, nothing is like to be taken out in consideration for what is reality. This is just the things that I've been looking into it. So if you look about like philosophically why we working on Ethereum, for example, and why like we want to work on public chains and everything, and not on somehow some private chain that can be extremely more productive, and then can have this throughput, and why not? Like, look, the way that the internet was created, like we already know where it went. We already know how the systems were developed and everything. There's a lot of optimization. There's a lot of like reliability, but there's somehow very little transparency. And the whole idea that I have to rely on things is what keeps bothering me. You know, the whole idea that I have to ask permission to send this message and not send straight away to Mark, to Tom, to whoever I want. It's really bothers me. So this is why we work on the public chain. And now if you look, all right, when we're gonna have a ledger that doesn't charge $1 for a transaction fee and doesn't like allows you basically to really get some value of the network? The answer is really clear. I don't know. And but what I say is that like the desire to have this ledger that can have throughput and everything, it's what moved 4,000 people to fly to a small city in Europe to work on that, to talk about it, to really look into, okay, how can we create this ledger, that can deliver business, that can deliver people, that can like somehow change the way we interface with the internet, interface with the digital world. But I'm not going to say a date.
Okay.
I mean, I would actually challenge that question and think about whether we actually need baseline layer 1 infrastructure blockchain that actually is able to handle millions or even thousands of transactions per second. Because if we look at what the blockchain is actually trying to secure, a blockchain like Ethereum or Bitcoin is basically providing security, right? And the security is put up by the miners that actually bought hardware and spent millions and billions of dollars to kind of secure this chain. So then the question is, okay, like for all the transactions that need to be done, do all those transactions need to be backed by billions of dollars of security? And the answer is probably no, right? Depending on the context, most of those transactions do not need that level of security. And so in that way, if we're actually doing that on these layer 1 blockchains, we're overpaying way too much for these things that don't really matter. And I think that's why there's a lot of talk about layer 2, layer 3 solutions that basically is just passing the risk around that says, you know what, like we can play these economic games that we can put down deposits and have smaller amounts of money guarantee a smaller amount of security that fits better for a lot of these use cases that we talked about today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I made that fairly clear in my presentation that that there are a whole host of applications out there where you don't need consensus. The mining is arguably there to sort of handle the double spending problem. Believe it or not, there are other ways to handle that are cheaper. We seem bound into this notion of one chain. We seem bound into this notion of everybody having to pay attention to it and one copy. In reality, there are a whole host of applications out there that are, broadly speaking, I need to store it somewhere. I need to have some controls on that. Restricted number of people actually need to see it, and it needs to be non-repudiable. And there are lots of ways of achieving non-repudiability which don't involve mining, and so suddenly you're in a different world. And I also think this public-private thing gets out of control. Ethereum's private, Bitcoin's private. I don't know where they are, I don't know how to find them, I don't engage with the protocol. I can't deal with it. But there are lots of other ways that they're permissioned systems in the jargon. Remember, permission systems as a concept, and this huge divide in the community is only 3 years old. Richard Gendel Brown writes this up and sort of goes on about permission, unpermission. Everybody goes, oh, that's what we want unpermissioned systems. I'm sorry, there's permissioning there. I have to pay the miners to get into the damn thing. So it's not as clear as that. Lots of systems out there, and I like the notion of transmitter-receiver systems, which are already existing and have existed for a while. And I think they're going to pick up as the momentum that's been given by Bitcoin, the momentum that's been given by Ethereum, does create a hunger and a need to do something, and there are lots of cheaper ways of doing it.
Okay. Could we maybe ask the panel, we still have another question in the back?
Almost. Okay, I just had like tiny question before for the project trust, risk and trust. So you were mentioning that everything is like you exchange rating for certain like a risk probability, so people can have like kind of poker-like stakes in which they can risk money to a certain level. And it kind of looked like a very micropayment system, and I wonder if you feel like this is ever scalable for big money where the risk is substantial. Like how would you develop it into bigger stakes where people are risking like thousands or even more millions or?
Actually, I believe that it's more compatible with big stakes, exactly because big stakes are most of the time not owned by just one individual, but usually are owned by a cohort of individuals. So I think that this actually exists as a bank product, and it goes by the name of lines of credit. It has some similarity to our construction. And this idea of being able to touch the same money, more than one person being able to use the same money, of co-ownership in a sense, is already out there. And especially in the big scale systems, I would definitely want to. Instead of having my money just sitting there, or investing it somewhere, well, investing it somewhere is a choice. But if I prefer to own it, I could also invest it wherever I wanted to invest, but keep it in the form of trust, as I have described. So, on top of just handing out my money and hoping for some returns, the person who gets the investment, who receives the investment, can choose not to use up all the money and leave some money there. And this shows that I trust them. And this is an indication for the rest of the market that this person who I invested into is trustworthy. And so you would already hand out your money. You will already trust that you receive something back. Now you can actually leverage this and give information to other people, and you will benefit from it because other people will trust you, and the person who you're trusting will benefit from it because this person seems trustworthy to the people who trust you. So I think that this actually may even work better in the high stakes case than in the low stakes case where you just have your money in your pocket and that's all. But I could be also mistaken.
Okay, I think respecting some, it's getting late. I thought maybe good just to go through the panel, see if there are any parting words as we close off and go to the, I think there'll still be some people sticking around for drinks afterwards.
Yeah, thanks again for the invitation. I think it's really important for Civic to also show face in Europe because we feel we are developing a technology that helps privacy preserving your identity and associated elements. And I think Europe is a big market that could lead that technology to like a breakthrough.
Thank you for coming today, and thank you for powering through all these talks and the panel as well. And I hope that I think that all the things that were presented today were really, really interesting. And I hope from my side that I can soon deliver to you Trust is Risk so you can play around with it and see for yourselves if it's worth the buck or not. Good night.
Cool. Thanks a lot for coming, guys. And go to tenzorum.org and get your Tenz ID, please. All right? And then I can send you some stuff there, and remember to tag me when you claim your Tenz ID so I can know you guys claimed. Thank you very much for coming. It was a pleasure to present to you guys.
Yeah. Well, it's been very worth coming to Bitcoin Wednesday here in Amsterdam, so thank you. And I think I'd echo the point about Europe. There was a great thing that Michael Porter did in the 80s and 90s on competition, and he pointed out that he went to Sweden for the best mining equipment, not because Sweden was really good at mining, but because the rock was so hard that what they could possibly mine needed it. And I think, you know, things like GDPR and the demands that we're making in Europe for privacy and identity mean that this is probably one of the better markets from which identity systems will come.
I've been looking forward to this for many months, so it's really good to be here. I was glad that I could make the trip after Prague, because I'm usually based in New York and it's a long flight here. And like my big takeaway tonight is you know, I feel like a lot of the solutions presented here are meant for the for the everyday consumer, are meant for like disrupting existing industries using this shared ledger, and I think that's cool, because it's been years where decentralized projects have been building for other decentralized projects, but we're in this phase where projects in this space is ready to go out there into the world and make a big difference and disrupt existing industries. So I find that very exciting. Thanks for having me.